Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here with another Friday Reads. I had a great reading week with a lot of variety. Usually I'm just in one book all week, but I read a short one, so I finished that and moved on to another. First, at the start of the week, and all of the books I've been reading have been excellent. I finished Writers and Lovers by Lily King last weekend. Really enjoyed this book and really enjoyed buddy reading it with Melinda at A Web of Stories. I will link below to her recap of this book. And my Friday reads from last week is when I talked in great depth about this book. So the only thing I would add is the ending. I loved the ending. I thought it was very satisfying. Melinda talks about how it was a little too neat for her, and I understand that. We just had a discussion in my book group about that, whether happy endings are, like some of us like happy endings, and some said they feel too contrived. I didn't think this felt contrived because I thought the author did a good job of setting up why and how good things started happening to the narrator. As Melinda and I both said, it's a book about grief, and I thought the author set up very well a couple of things either happened or the main character took the incentive to do that helped her start to heal and begin to move forward from her grief. And I felt that was why all these good things were happening to her toward the end. There was one thing that Melinda and I talked about that I thought was a little unrealistic. Generally, I was very, very happy with the book and really enjoyed it and loved the experience of buddy reading it with Melinda. Next, I feel like I need a drum roll for this one. I finally read The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Jess, thank you so much for all the encouragement last year. Jess, Book Girl TV, this is her favorite novel, and I can see why, Jess. It was amazing. I don't know how, as a teenager in the 70s and early 80s, I missed reading this. Certainly I had heard of it, and I was trying to figure out if I had read some of her other novels. That was Then, This Is Now sounds really familiar to me. The title does. That when I read what it's about, that didn't necessarily ring a bell, but let's admit it, my teenagers were a long time ago. So anyway, I am so glad I finally read this. It was outstanding. It was such a compelling narrative. This book just sucked me in. I stayed up way too late every single night I was reading it because I just had to know what happened next. And it's a short novel. I finished it. I'm usually a slow reader, and I finished it very quickly. It centers around a group of friends, boys in mid-1960s in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they are termed by the others in their school and area as greasers. They wear their hair long and greased back, when most of the other boys of the time kept their hair pretty short. They wear leather jackets, jeans, white t-shirts, and leather jackets. Kind of the classic picture, I kept thinking about Happy Days while I was reading this. And the main narrator is the youngest of the group, whose real given name is Ponyboy Curtis. He is living with his two older brothers, Soda, that's his real name as well, and Daryl, the oldest. I guess their parents got creative with the names after Daryl. So the three of them live alone together because their parents recently died, I think in a car accident. So, and their greatest fear is that they'll be split up. They're very close, these three brothers. Well, Ponyboy is walking home from the movies one night by himself, and he gets beat up by a rival gang. They're not really like gangs like we think of now, but that everybody calls the socias. That's short for social. Socias are wealthy, upscale, they drive fancy cars, they dress in nice clothes, they're a little spoiled. Some of them are kind of cruel, though not all of them. And a group of them jumps Ponyboy and beats him up. And so his gang is really upset about this. So, this starts some even more friction than there already was. And one night, Ponyboy and Johnny, who's a couple of years older, I think he's 16, but he's really small. And he and Ponyboy are the closest in the group, other than his brothers. And Johnny and Ponyboy are out late one night. Ponyboy actually had an argument with Daryl and left the house. A group of socias come across Ponyboy and Johnny, and bad things happen. That sets off the events of the novel. So it is certainly a novel about friendship. The boys have a very close friendship with each other, but also about family and found family. The novel is very much about class and class differences. And, reading this, it took place in the mid-60s, which is when I was born. But, I think about when I was in high school in the late 70s and early 80s, it was the same thing with different, and I'm sure it's the same in every high school, with the different names that people call different groups. There's usually jocks, so that's usually standard, but beyond that, in my school, the smart kids were called brains. The kids wearing the leather jackets in the late 70s, early 80s were called grubs. Seriously, I know, it sounds horrible now, but that's what everybody called them. And I think what they called themselves, too. I don't know. But anyway, I could relate to that kind of stratification of teenagers, how they see themselves and how they see others. This book has so much in-depth emotion. It is just, boy, it gets you. It is really moving, poignant. I absolutely loved it. I can't believe it took me this long to read it. Thanks for the extra motivation, Jess. And now that I've read it, I read a little bit online about the movie adaptation that was made back in, I think, like early 80s. It's like a Hollywood A-list of all the stars that were big when I was a kid. So I definitely want to see the movie now as well. And now I have moved on to one that I've been waiting to read, The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. I gave this to my husband as a gift. He read it. It's been on my side of the shelf now. I would have guessed 2 or 3 years, but he wrote in the front of it when he read it in 2019. So it's been 5 years sitting on my shelf. January is the perfect time to read it. This is a very wintry novel. It's set in Vermont. Many scenes take place in the winter. It's been really, really cold here. Like temperatures ranging from the single digits to highs of 20 for much of January. And we've got some snow on the ground that normally if Delaware gets snow, it melts in a couple of days. But because it's been so cold, we've had snow on the ground all of January, really. So this is definitely the right vibe, but it is also a super creepy novel. So it's got dual narratives. It takes place in a small town in Vermont. The first narrative begins in 1908, and it says it's taken out of the diary of Sarah, a woman who lived back then. And Sarah is thinking back to her childhood and some strange things that she saw in the woods behind her house. And the woman who she called Auntie, who almost seemed to have some magical powers. People would come to her when the doctor couldn't help, for example. that kind of sets the stage. And then there are entries from Sarah's diary when she's an adult and a mother and her child goes missing. And then we jump forward to present day, where there are multiple, you get multiple characters' perspectives. But so far, I'm not all that far into it. So far, it's narrated by Ruthie, a 19-year-old in the present day, living in the same small town, I think on the same piece of property. And what happens when her mother goes missing. So, and there is a long history in this town of people going missing. So I don't want to say, I was trying to think how to describe this book. I don't want to give any spoilers, and so much happens right from the beginning. But it's definitely suspenseful. It's very tense. It's also about spirits and the paranormal, which I really enjoy. Coincidentally, I was just catching up on podcasts because I've been spending so much time listening to audiobooks. And I listened to the last few podcasts of the Book Cougars, friends of mine who have this fabulous book podcast. And their theme for 2025 for their 4 quarterly read-alongs is ghost stories. So I'm going to tell them about this because it's a perfect fit. So I'm enjoying The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. Ooh, it's a little chilling on these chilly nights. On audio, I decided I haven't read a middle grade book yet this year, so I chose a middle grade audio, 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz. Alan is a known quantity. He is an outstanding author of middle grade historical fiction. He often takes a historical event, puts middle grade aged children in it, and tells the story from their perspective. Sorry, I'm still struggling a bit with Invisalign. I just switched to a new set yesterday, and yeah, it's like getting used to it all over again. Anyway, so 2 Degrees is not historical. It is actually set in the present day. And the title, 2 Degrees, refers to the 2 degrees that the Earth has warmed in the past however many years, and what a difference 2 degrees makes. So the story takes place in 3 different places, looking at kids dealing with climate-related disasters and issues from their own perspective. So in California, very fittingly for what we're hearing on the news right now and what all those poor people are going through, it's about wildfires. A girl and her dad are out riding their horses in the mountains, and they see the beginnings of a wildfire, and suddenly it's all around them. They encounter another girl and her dad out hiking. And so they're not from the local area. So they help them get back to the car, but then the girls get separated from their dads. So it's 2 girls in a wildfire on their own. The second story, and these are interspersed, so you get a little bit of each story. So I've finished part 1 of each story, and I'm into part 2 right now. We go up to Manitoba, Canada, to Churchill, which also happens to be the setting for A Blizzard of Polar Bears by Alice Henderson, a thriller, an outdoor thriller that I highly recommend. So here we've got 2 13-year-old boys. They're best friends in the tiny town of Churchill. One of the boys does tours in a big, like, snow vehicle for tourists to look at the polar bears. So this is an area where there are a lot of polar bears. And so they're talking about how the polar bears rely on the ice for hunting seals, and how the season when the ice is melted is getting longer and longer, making the polar bears more hungry, more desperate. And these 2 boys are off on their own when they encounter some polar bears. And then finally, the third story is set in Miami, where a girl lives with her mother and they're low income. They don't have a lot of money. They've ridden out hurricanes before, but this one has a mandatory evacuation, and the newscaster says, this is the big one, folks. This is the one we've been dreading. It's coming. It's a Category 5. It's coming directly for Miami, and bringing with it a huge storm surge. The problem is they don't really have the option of leaving. They couldn't afford to stay in a hotel somewhere. They have nowhere to go, and they try to ride it out. And again, she gets separated from her mom during the storm. So I'm now into part 2, getting a little more about each of the stories. So far, it is excellent. Alan Gratz, like I said, is a known quantity. He is an excellent writer, and he just has a way, usually, of bringing these historical events to life. But here, to bringing to life what it's like. And again, it's so relevant right now. Everyone who doesn't live in California is watching on the news these horrible disaster scenes, the destruction, and it's just horrifying. But Gratz is helping kids to understand what it's like to actually be there in a bad hurricane, in a wildfire, with the ice melting and the polar bears coming into town. And, he's bringing it all to life. I'm listening on audio, and it is excellent on audio so far, with multiple narrators for each of the main characters, and I'm really enjoying it. So that's what I'm reading this week. Please let me know in the comments down below what you're reading.